So, good afternoon for you. Good morning from Paris. It's 2 p.m. for you. It's 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning for me here. I don't know what is the weather in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City today. Here it's winter. No, right now. That means we are just a few degrees above zero. However, it's quiet. There's nearly no wind, no rain this morning, and no snow. Okay. So we have session number 9. We have session number 8 here yesterday. If you remember what we did yesterday, we went through the banking sector, analyzing situation of the banking sector, and I choose different cases, in fact, 4 different cases. The HSBC case, which was presented on Thursday evening, the BNP Paribas, the ABN AMRO, and the Crédit Agricole Crédit Lyonnais cases yesterday. There are 4 different cases and good examples of what happened in terms of M&A in the banking sector, with very different situation and different issues. Some of them with an arbitrage, some others with a more classical conclusion. Today, for this last session, I would say, which is only presentation for me. After that, you will be the main part, of the session with your cases, presentations. We will deal first with the pharmaceutical sector, second one with airlines, and I hope to have some time to conclude with a few slides on examples in the energy sector. So we have here, or you have in front of you, slides, for all the pharmaceutical sector and on a specific case, and the case is Sanofi. But before going into the case Sanofi technically, I want to introduce this case with a few elements on Sanofi and Aventis and some elements which are common to many cases in this economic sector. So here you have first slide on the environment, and explaining that we have a case with an acquisition which is hostile acquisition at the beginning. At least you will see that very often hostile acquisitions are moving into friendly acquisitions after negotiation, and this is the case here. So it is an acquisition by it's a small firm. It's a question of comparison, because it was not a small firm, in fact, of a bigger firm, a larger firm. This is what is written on point 1 here. An offer of a small fish, as we said, it's what you find in articles, and you find many articles on this operation. Small fish to buy a big fish. That means that Aventis was bigger in terms of market value, was bigger in terms of sales, bigger in terms of number of employees, and so on. But number 2, in fact, trying to buy the number 1 in France and to become a larger competitor on the world market. With this offer, Sanofi became the number 1 on the continent in Europe. So the question you can raise is, do we have many hostile offer from number 2 or number 1, from small fish on big fish. You don't find that kind of bid every day, of course, but we have regularly that kind of situation, you know. For example, in Europe, we have cases also in the insurance sector, and that's in fact how number 2 in Europe, AXA, was organized. They bought privatized insurance company, which was number 1 on the French market, number 2 in Europe after Allianz, and they became number 2 also. This is also have a good example also in the oil industry. Everybody knows Total, which is one of the major petroleum company today. And Total was at a point in time, it was about 20 years ago, was number 2 in France, you know, and they bought the number 1 called Elf Aquitaine at the time. No one today know the word, the name of the brand Elf Aquitaine. It just disappeared after the acquisition and the merger. But in fact, at that time, Total was number 2. So in the insurance, in the oil sector, petroleum sector, and in the pharmaceutical sector, 3 very large and important economic sectors, you find operations from small fish on big fish. How do you explain that can happen? What are the characteristics of the firms involved in general? First, the big fish is not performing very well, you know. I mean, if you have a look to the main return ratios, you know, well, you know, like ROA or ROE, you understand that the return of a small fish is much higher than the return of a big fish. And generally, you know, the small fish has regularly increasing returns. So the market and the investor of a big fish are buying the potential return, higher return of a small fish. This is the first point. Second, you can make a first selection of potential targets, just having a look to data we have been talking about with the BSN Saint-Gobain case, which is a price earning. Price earning of the small fish is always higher, I would say much higher than the price earning of a big fish. That means the market believe, you know, and it is incorporated into that data, that the growth in the future will be much higher for the small fish than for the big fish. And the market and the investor, they buy the growth potential of the bidder, in fact, which is the small fish in that case. You know. Very often also you find in the assets more promising assets for the small fish than for the big fish. It's not connected to the size, nothing to do, but that means the strategy, the portfolio management, you know, their choices for of products and services in the core business have been better. You know, you can have we have example here. If we have a look, you know, if we have a look to Sanofi, for example, and to the research which are under development, promising molecules were more numerous for Sanofi than for Aventis, even if the budget spent in research every year is higher for Aventis. So when you're in research, have looked to the research in pharmaceutical sector, it's also a good element, a good measure of potential in the future. So second, if you have a look to the oil industry for Total and Alpha Aquitaine, the number of potential, production sites, promising production sites, was much higher for Total than for Alpha Aquitaine. Of course, it was not at that time in the level of sales, but the market also took into account that kind of element. That means what you find with portfolio in terms of potential development, in terms of research, in terms of potential production, is also one issue. So the potential production and potential research on one point, the price earning, which is really a second one, and returns, classical returns, are higher for the small fish than for the big fish. That's necessary condition to start with a hostile offer when you are the smaller one and want to buy the larger one. You will say, let's come back to BSN Danone and Saint-Gobain, and you see the limits of this analysis here. What was really the problem of BSN in front of Saint-Gobain? It was the capacity to finance the deal. They were more advanced in terms of designing or restructuring the core business. They had better returns. They had a better PE, okay? But in fact, they did not have cash, and they were obliged to issue, and only for 30%, of the total amount of a potential deal, this 30% by convertible bonds. So there was a weakness there. So what you have to see, and this is the last point, when you meet the three criteria I mentioned, quality of portfolio of assets and the particular future potential production, PE, the level of the PE and the level of returns, you have to take care of the potential financial resources which can be used to pay for the deal. Second, pharmaceutical sector is an economic sector with many acquisitions, small and large. Many of these large groups you know today, wherever they are, in the US, in Switzerland, in France, in Britain also. 30 years ago, they were medium-sized firms, in fact. Let's say large, medium-sized firms, okay? And progressively over the years, they made acquisitions and merged with their acquisitions with the company they bought. So it's an economic sector with many acquisitions, and the large groups today, the larger players, have been made over time through acquisitions, small, medium, but also from time to time, large acquisition. And this is one of the large acquisition in the economic sector. You understand also that it's more and more difficult today to launch take of a bid. First, because the amount of cash to put on the table is very, very high. It's very difficult to finance. And second, because again, of the regulations in terms of concentration, dominant position, duopoly, and so on. That kind of regulation we met several times during that course. So acquisitions since the Sanofi Aventis acquisition 15 years ago have moved to another kind of acquisition, but we still have many acquisitions. There are more acquisition of small growing firms, sometimes with negative return and no profit. That's the case of all these biotechnology firms, which are progressively incorporated into large pharma, what we call large pharma, the big player, in fact. You should notice also that in some cases today, this is very interesting if you have a look to vaccine, for the pandemic, you find alliances, either joint venture or just alliances. They share a product, they share the distribution of a product, they have specific agreement. The case of Pfizer and BioNTech is a very good example of that. BioNTech is a German company, was created by engineers coming from Turkey, and Pfizer is one of the largest pharma. It's US based, but they are still independent today. They just have agreements. It is an alliance for the development and the distribution of the vaccine. So you find other kind of relations, which are part of the M&A also. But this is something new, something new when I say this has been developed for the last 10 years. Third point, the environment in the pharmaceutical sector is very regulated. It's really regulated. And you see that with the vaccines today. There is a laboratory research team. They start developing a vaccine, and you have several steps for the researcher to make tests. And after that, when they've been through the 3 main steps which are required, they can ask authorities the right, to sell this vaccine either to hospital or to government, even to classical distribution system in each country. So you have regulators, national agencies, and for a complex set of countries like the EU, we have the EU agency. For example, the French government or German government, they cannot allow the doctors and hospitals to use a new vaccine against the pandemic, against the COVID-19, if they don't have before the authorization of the EU agency dedicated to health and pharmaceutical product, and then of their own agency. And in a country like Germany or France, the local national agency, in fact, is made of 2 agencies. The first one dealing with the scientific dimension, and the second one with the ethic dimension. So it's very, very regulated. You cannot sell a product just because you had a good idea and it seems working on 3 persons. Second, in many countries also, the prices are regulated. And why are they regulated? Because we have many countries social security system. It means you have a kind of mutual body taking in charge paying for 100% of the price of the product or vaccine at the moment, or for part of it. So before allowing the possibilities to sell a new product on the market, the pharma, like Pfizer, for example, or Sanofi, they need an agreement on the price of a product of the market. That means also there is no competition on the price on the market. When you have an agreement like this one, all the pharma shops or system of distribution, they sell the product at the same price. In many countries, you don't find any kind of competition on the price. But prices could be different from one country to the other. For example, in Europe, for a large part of this kind of products, the prices are higher in Germany than they are in France. So for some product, it's easier to go to Germany on the other side of the border and to buy your product there. So you have a kind of competition of the price, but which is not, I would say, a classical competition system on the market. So it's a very, very regulated sector. For, of course, big deals need authorization, and authorization at the national level, and also in the US at the federal and at the EU level in Europe, because you have concentration rule first. The concentration rules are applied as they are in the food industry or in the banking system, and because also this is supposed to be today, at least, particularly with pandemic, a kind of strategic sector, and government protect more and more their sovereignty on the of a main player in this economic sector. So you need generally national authorization to make a concentration, to launch takeover bid, or and when you get it, you need in Europe, for example, EU authorization based on the regulations we know on concentrations. So that's where we are with this Sanofi case. So now a few points, a few points here. So we should first underline the importance of R&D and of the quality of the commercial team, which means we have got, of course, a problem there, because when you calculate the value of a kind of player, you want to use the balance sheet, you don't find any point on the R&D and the commercial team. This is not incorporated in the balance sheet in our present accounting system, even with the new norm standards we have got right now. Of course, you find R&D somewhere, because what is R&D? It's mainly, the largest part is expenses into researchers, engineers, doctors, and so on, teams of researchers. And you have after that products and of course equipment. So you will find the equipment, of course. You will find the products bought outside in the income statement. You will find the wages, social security expenses for the researchers in the income statement. But in the balance sheet, you find only the equipment, which is generally a small part of the total. And R&D expenses, it's one of the key points when you want to enter in the calculation of a value. After that, it's like for any kind of investment, you don't know how funds were allocated. We see here that for Sanofi Aventis, the budget, R&D budget of Aventis is much higher than the R&D budget of Sanofi, but the allocation of the funds, in Sanofi than in Aventis. So commercial team, it is the same. You have to organize the distribution, and you need a commercial team with persons, good education in this industry, and some kind of commercial marketing also education. At ESCP, we have got a specialized master for doctors in the pharmacy, in medicine, for example, they want to become to work for large players like Avantis, like Pfizer, like Merck, like others, in the commercial team. So they have a good education in science, I would say, and they join us in a specific program which is dedicated for them, at the master level, for acquiring or integrating at least a good basis of management and more specifically trade and marketing. So the quality of this commercial team is really an issue. It's part of the success. You need to invest in R&D. You need to allocate properly the funds, and you need to manage also manage the team, the commercial team. And this is not, of course, in the balance sheet. So part of the value is in these two elements, the R&D and the commercial team, and they are outside the accounting system. Point two, you get, of course, other elements which explain the value of companies. First, you have a problem of brands, patents, which are different ways protecting protection for the products sold on the market. And some of the products are dominating the market. We have number one to fight again a disease, and we have a very high level of sales for years. And this is what we call blockbusters. Blockbusters are, if you come back to the vocabulary we have in strategy and in finance, they are cash cows. Blockbusters, cash cows is one of the points. And when you find in the pharmaceutical firm one or two blockbuster, they produce cash flows. It's like in the beer industry. When you have a beer producer, remember, and you are in the food industry, if you manage properly your brewery, your beer production, you have a recurrent cash flow, high recurrent cash flow. And this is the same here. When you have one or two blockbuster, you get a source of recurrent cash flow. And this is one of the strengths for pharmaceutical companies, which allow to finance easily the research and the improvement of the commercial team. So, of course, in terms of evaluation, we need to identify first, but it is quite easy, the blockbusters, but after that to calculate, the value of these blockbusters, which is not very difficult, because you have recurrent cash generally. That means it's a kind of Gordon-Shapiro model applied to the blockbuster. So the same method, same problem of calculation and convergence. You have also the problem of the brands. The problem of brands went through with the food industry, for example, and this is exactly the same. So you find also experts in the evaluation of the brands, and you do exactly the same we did with Interbrand for the food industry. So these elements, explain for a large part also the valuation of the companies. The third point, the history in the context of strategic and management choices, one of the key points, for example, here is you have two or three, but the first one is for a pharmaceutical firm to be in a city or in a region where there is a culture of research in pharma. Okay, and if you have a look to Europe and to the US, you find specific area with that kind of culture. The number one in the world today is clearly the Boston area. You know where is Boston, northeast of the US, in Massachusetts, and then this number one place to be. It means you have universities with good research department. You find many players in the pharmaceutical sector. They interact with other players, create alliances with biotech, as we said before. And in Europe, you find at least two different places. The first one is in Switzerland, in the north west of Switzerland, on the border of Switzerland with Germany and with France in Basel. I know Basel generally for other reasons. For you, Basel, it's more financial oriented. Yeah, it's Basel, Basel norm, Basel standard, and so on. Basel 1, Basel 2, Basel 3. But Basel, you know, it's more kind of large zone for research and production of pharmaceutical products in Europe than even a financial sector, a financial area. And the second one is in France. It's around Lyon, you know, where you find Sanofi, for example, and some others, and universities. They are very connected to research centers, public research centers, independent research centers, universities, and they need that kind of environment, you know, to go further and to share the research. So this is not something new. It has been created for historical reason, and this history has created a culture which is centered around generally a city, Boston, Basel, and Lyon. And of course, Sanofi is based in Lyon. So Sanofi, you know, will meet several kind of problem. You will see they will succeed. I will explain the deal into details. They will succeed in that deal, okay? But they will get several problems afterwards. The first one being a management problem. Sanofi is made of acquisitions and mergers. And at the head of Sanofi, at the time of the operation, there is a guy, CEO. It's called, his name is Mr. De Hek, you know. The only problem with him, he has been very successful for 30 years. He was nominated at the age of 40, and he's 72. Okay, very successful, but you know, it's 72. He becomes a bit tired, and of course, even he is still managing properly the firm. Someone else is needed or will be needed in the years to come. A new management is very difficult to organize and to find. When you have that kind of situation, they started from a structure of a medium-sized firm, and there was one person really in charge, one CEO. He was a chief. He's still a chief. He's still the head. And of course, the firm is completely different. It's very international. It's much bigger. And for this reason, but also because of 72 years old person, they have to move to another system. And this is difficult. We had the same problem in BSN Danone. BSN Danone was very successful for 30 years. But by the middle of the 90s, you know, the CEO, Antoine Riboud, was about 42, 43, 1966. By 1995, he was an old man. And a new solution was needed. So they had this problem. On the other side, there is no stable management, and you will understand why. I will explain the structure of the two deals. The management teams have been moving, they are French and German, they are made of experienced management in private sector, but also of civil servant. It's very complex, and it never worked properly. So that's in that case difficult to find a solution, and the problem will be raised. I will tell you, explain you more later. A new research policy is also designed, will be designed. You take two research teams, one is smaller than the other one, Aventis is smaller, but more efficient, better allocation, more funds on the other side, but the return and the production of products is quite limited. So how do you solve that kind of problem? We find also the problem of a name. Brand and name. You have two groups. One is Sanofi, and in fact, it's not Sanofi, it's Sanofi Santé Labo. Okay, and the other one is Aventis. Sanofi Santé Labo was a result of a large merger between Sanofi and Santé Labo, and on the other side, Aventis was created. It was created scratch a few years before, after the preceding acquisition and merger, which created Aventis. So after the deal, you have two names, Sanofi, Santé Labo, and Aventis. The question is what to do. We had the question with Boussois, Souchon, Novozel becoming BSN. What will be the solution here? So you probably know that, of course, the solution at the end is to keep Sanofi only, to eliminate first Santé Labo, to keep Sanofi Aventis for a few years, and then to eliminate Aventis and to concentrate on Sanofi, which is the name of the group today. But you have always the problem of name, and you have to be very, very careful in the choice of a name. Remember also what's happened with Crédit Agricole and Crédit Lyonnais. This was part of the restructuration after the deal. Four, you will see that a new acquisition policy is designed. It means, when you are Sanofi, including Aventis, you are one of the largest world player, okay? And it's difficult to buy another large world player because of concentration rules. And also will become different, and you have to accelerate on your research production. So that's time to negotiate, to sign contract or more contract with university laboratories, university research teams, but also to make alliances and also to take either minority stake or to buy biotechnology firm. And the vaccine period we know right now is a good example of what happened in the last 10 years. So smaller firm, probably more operations, very diverse, very different, classical acquisitions and merger, contracts and joint venture, minority stake, alliance, all the potential dimension of policies in terms of acquisitions and mergers are used. So for valuation process here, you still have, I would say, the same questions. Should have a look to a timeline first, because timeline is important. When you are into an operation, you don't do anything else, or all the strategic decisions are stopped. No, you manage on a daily basis. Uh, you don't take care, or you don't come back on your long-term strategy. You just apply what was decided before. So timeline should be short. One of the key points also for the future for the position in a competitive world for those firms launching bids, is to reduce the time between the beginning, the launch of the offer and the final integration. This is part of the efficiency of the management of an operation. And you have a question here, as you had a question in other deals. Second point, synergies. What about synergies? Synergies in research, synergies in production, of course, costs, but also income, revenue synergies. So this is probably more difficult here than it is in the more classical economic sector, because you have, for example, to measure the synergies in research. Very difficult to merge research teams, and after that, very difficult to measure the synergies in terms of production of new molecule, of new products. Also, the synergies should be into the management, as we know. And here you have, as we explained already, two different structures. One is very centralized or on one man, and this is really the history of Sanofi Centenabo. And on the other side, you have a kind of group management style with two different cultures, German and French. And this is very difficult to merge and to get some positive synergies from that. It is clear that in the first month or years, it will be probably negative synergy, but you have to try to measure and to have a plan to deal with that. So synergies is a calculation, will be inside negotiation between the teams, would be management of the research teams in order to restructure the research, allocate better the funds, and accelerate the production of new molecules. So valuation is quite classical, but there is something you cannot use here for a reason I explained, there's nearly nothing in the balance sheet, in fact. If your research, let's say research investment, research teams, if your commercial team is not into your balance sheet, difficult to use the balance sheet. So if you have a look to the method used, you find traditional cash flow methods, okay, the multiples as usual, and something which is a bit different because particularly for the large laboratories, they are very often made of for 75 or 80% of the total sales, they are made by blockbusters. And it means blockbusters, each blockbuster, it's nearly a segment of the industry, and they are not completely independent. But for most of the cost and income, they are independent from the other blockbuster, which means you can find the value of each blockbuster, which is called one part in this method. So let's say if you have, for example, 75 or 80% of your total sale, which is made of 3 or 4 blockbusters, you can calculate the value of each blockbuster, have a kind of residual valuation for the other services and products, and made the aggregation. You add all these 4 values together. This is what we call the sum of the parts method, which is used also in industries with very independent department or products. Pharmaceutical sector is a good example. This is used by conglomerates also. when we have very, very different activities like GE, General Electric, this is also used by the petroleum industry. What is the relation between the distribution of for the individuals, cars and lorries in Europe, and the production sites under the sea, in the Atlantic Ocean or in the Pacific Ocean. It can be value can be calculated separately. Okay. Always remember that you have several values, and that's what will happen as usual. You choose methods, you apply your methods, you make calculations. You are very careful of the parameter to be used, but at the end you have a range, several values, a range, and you get one price. When you make an offer in a bid, you need one price. After that, you can, of course, make proposal on how to pay the price in shares, cash, or cash and shares, mixed offer. And this is what we will find here. Last point here, sensitivity analysis and final price decision. Of course, you understand that your choice of a price is based on multiple hypotheses, and you generally try to understand what is the sensitivity to each of these hypotheses, and this is where the table we'll see in a few minutes for that kind of problem, and you have a final price decision with a means of payments. The acquisition process here it will be a two-step process, which is a hostile offer first, and then negotiation and a friendly offer. That's happened very often. It's difficult to have a negotiation at the beginning. No one in a potential target want to negotiate. So the bidder launch takeover bid. It's a hostile takeover bid. Of course, the board of the target says no. There is a kind of war. We see some of the elements of war, negotiation, arbitrage sometimes, and then a second offer, which is a friendly offer. And this is what's happened here. Point two, in these offers, the hostile one and the friendly one, you find, in fact, multiple offers. Multiple offers because 3 means of payments were proposed. And it's easy to understand, when you have a shareholder group, which is made of a large number of shareholders, but very different shareholders. For example, here you had a large group of shareholders in France, a large group of shareholders in Germany, a large group of shareholders in the US, and they are submitted to different tax laws. That means the profit they made on their investment in the company bought at the end will not be submitted to some tax rate. They are also in with different culture. The consideration for profits is not the same. So you have to take into account all these situation, history and culture, tax laws, for example, and also the situation of the institutions, because you have investment funds, you have banks, and insurance company, in terms of liquidity, in terms of profitability. So what you do to take into account all these different situations in different countries of the different categories of shareholders, institutions, like insurance company, banks, investment funds, but also for small investors. You make multiple offers. And multiple offers means 3 offers for the first step, 3 offers for the second step, 3 offers in the hostile offer, 3 offers in the friendly offer, one of them being payment in shares, second one payment in cash, and the third one a mixed payment, part in shares and part in cash, in order to satisfy all the shareholders of the target. Some of them with a premium are really very happy to get the cash. Some of us don't want any cash for tax reasons, for example, or because we believe in the new project, the new strategic project, and in the synergies after the end of the deal. And some of us, we want a mixed solution, depending on one part of the cash and to invest in, or to spend their money in some other project, or they like also to participate to the new merger. 3, we see the target defense policy. So you find target defense, and they are made with 4 points. We see here you find, many techniques to fight against the bidder. First, it is communication, of course. Second, it is to use the courts, and with the courts, at least you save time. It will take a few months or a few years, some time, and to postpone the deal. And the second step. The third one is to ask governments, regulators at the national or the federal, European level what they think about the offer. And fourth, it could be the use of engineering techniques to modify the structure of the rights of vote, which is a key point in that kind of operation. 4, we can ask for white knight to come, and you can see here that there is a white knight coming in for just a few weeks, and then leaving the battlefield. And this player is Novartis. Novartis is a Swiss-based group, and I will say a few words in a few minutes on that. You have also, of course, as we said, to deal with the national governments, the EU institution, the EU concentration team, while we think about this industry in terms of strategy of the countries and in terms of concentration also. And last here, I say a few words, but it is quite simple on the merger project. So this is what I wanted to present before moving further here. And now I will present you a simplified version of the case because we don't have much time. And I will leave you with the second category of slides on the details, with the details. So I try to find my slide. I hope I find them. Put that in there. Is it this one? No, it's not this one. I lost them somewhere. Function airline. Just a minute, please. I'm looking for my slides. Where are they? It's not this one. It's not this one I want. Perhaps I can start with this one. Received another one. Okay, so I will use this one. So you have here in this industry, you find a few players, And among the players, this is here a table, you have Sanofi, yeah, which is now one of the largest laboratories in the world. First, you have Pfizer, but of course, the position of Sanofi wasn't this one at the time of the deal. I don't find it. It's not what I wanted. Excuse me, just a minute, please. Zoom is not a good technique. Just a few minutes. The European concentration in the pharmaceutical sector. C'est le deuxième. De Sanofi. Alors ça c'est le 12, j'ai trouvé. Mais c'est trop difficile, c'est trop compliqué.
Sanofi, le 12.
C'est celui qui est à gauche là. Yeah. Il doit être là. Il doit être ça. Ouais, okay, merci. Merci. So, sorry for that, it was a technical problem. So I hope you see my slide now. And the second set of slides in consolidation in the European pharmaceutical industry. It's a short summary of the case. You probably will have, you had some others. You had some others with the presentation number 12 I started with, which is much more detailed if you want to read again, But it is better. It's more simple, it's simplified, but it's better to really understand what's happened. So here we'll go through the main, I would say the main points, SWOT analysis, synergies, takeover battle, evaluation of a new group, and the conclusions. So in fact, you get two players. You know the names, Sanofi and Santé Labo, and Aventis. And as I said, Sanofi Santé Labo is a large, already a large player, even if it is not one of the real leader in the world. It is the second one in France. It is the number 8 in Western Europe at the time of the deal from 2003 to 2005. Okay, but it has been growing very, very quickly with many acquisitions. And it's a bit like BNP Paribas or like BSN. They were very successful in developing their strategy. The core business was clearly identified, properly managed. It means after each past acquisitions, they went back on the core business and made a strategic analysis, redefining the main trend, the main line of the strategy, and of course the perimeter of a core business. Remember that it's managed by one person, Mr. De Heyck. It's very centralized management, which has been successful up to now, okay, which has been very successful up to now, but with limits, the limits of the size, of the complexity, and of the age of the CEO. This is also a typical private French group based in Lyon, with limited connection with the state, which is unusual in France. On the other hand, you have on the right side here Aventis. And Aventis is a very complex structure. It's a kind of intellectual design. You find here two players which merged a few years before, about 8 years before. And these two players, by their merger, organized a group which is much bigger than Sanofi. If you have a look to the net sales, it's 16,000 billion, and 8 on the other side. It's 1 to 2. It's 1 to 2. So after 6-7 years, group is now nearly organized. But the group is made of two different companies. In fact, at the beginning, it's a merger between equals. Merger between equals is generally doesn't succeed, because there's a problem of management and power. And one of the player is a German group, Hoechst, and the second one is a French group, Rhône Poulenc. So Hoechst is based in Rhine Valley, in not very far from the French border, in a small city north of Karlsruhe, and the French group is in Lyon. Okay. So it is decided to merge, and to make a deal between equal. It's a merger. There is no real acquisition. You take two groups, you decide to merge, but you maintain equilibrium between the two management teams, and you make a decision on the headquarters, which is a compromise. Instead of keeping one of the headquarters, you just decide to create a new headquarters on the border in Strasbourg, on the French side of the border. But in Strasbourg has no culture, it's a city. There is no culture in terms of pharmaceutical sector, research in the pharma. This is not the expertise you find in this area. No? And this is quite important. That's what I tried to explain. So it's management between equals, and the merger result, in fact, was poor because the teams at all levels wanted to keep their independence. So the net income, if you have a look here, is only about 20% higher than the net income of Sanofi, with a level of sales which is the double. And if you have a look also to research expenses, it's 2.5 times the level of Sanofi, but the growth rate, as we see, is not the growth rate of the other company. Now, something which is very, very important, and just give you some simplified elements of understanding there. And this creates a kind of asymmetry between the two players. On one side, you get for Aventis a very simple, shareholders group with float, which is very large, more than 80%, 83 here, and only one identified important shareholder, the Kuwait Petroleum Company, 13%. It is a result of negotiation between Kuwait authorities and the French state. And on the other side, it's completely different, because if you have a look, you understand that you find two very large and powerful shareholders, L'Oréal, and everybody knows L'Oréal in the world today, in cosmetics, and Total in the petroleum, in the oil industry. And if you simplify, they got about 20% each. That means together, we got around 40%, and they can drive the shareholder. You can raise the question, why are they here? You know, it's just because of the preceding acquisitions. You know, L'Oréal and Total has invested in the pharma industry, even in medium-sized industries, 15, 20, 25 years before. And they sometimes organize mergers, sometimes were participants to the acquisitions. And at the end, you know, they, with the not all of their stake they had in merged firms, they had about 20%, which really means the firm is under the control of these large two groups, at least if they act together. Another question would be a potential war. Is a potential war possible between these two large players with their power in terms of cash and possibility to participate to better inside the shareholder group? But anyway, at that time, it seemed that they agreed to stay there. Even this progressively, you know, they wanted to live. Just to give you an information, since that time, Total has sold, you know, its stake in Sanofi, and L'Oréal is still there with a large stake, the number one shareholder of the new group after the acquisition and the merger. I remember that at that time, you know, Sanofi is Sanofi Saint-Elabo, not Sanofi. And in fact, L'Oréal was the main shareholder of Saint-Elabo, and Total was the main shareholder of Sanofi. And when they merged, they kept with their stake and called the group Sanofi Saint-Elabo. And this is Sanofi Saint-Elabo, which will, with the supervision of L'Oréal and Total also, the bidder in this operation. So that also means that there is some kind of a symmetry. The structure of the Sanofi Saint-Elabo group is really protected by L'Oréal and Total. It's nearly impossible to succeed for a third player in takeover bid against this group. And on the other side, Aventis, you know, is the more than 80% of float. That means it's completely open, and the structure is not protected, and a good offer in terms of level of price, in terms of means payments, in terms of quality can succeed probably easily. Asymmetry. So when you have a look to M&A, always make analysis of the structure, the protection degree, and also on the potential financial ability, but resources, financial resources of these main shareholders to participate to the deal one way or another. Another point here, which is quite interesting, is the involvement in different continents. It was clear that for Sanofi, which is the bidder here, Sanofi is much more European than Aventis. Aventis is has a stake of activities, of operations in the US, and for Sanofi it will be good to be more involved in the US market, which is the number one market in the world. If you summarize very quickly some of the strengths and the weaknesses of both groups, what you understand here is that on the side of Sanofi, part of the strength is efficiency in R&D. That's what I said, funds invested are lower than for Aventis, but the allocation of the portfolio and the choice of the investment you do in research is a key in that kind of economic sector. You can say, okay, it's easy to strength or a weakness, but strong implementation in Europe. We know while the European market, rapid growth, and they had a high PE, high market value, and good capitalization. Okay, weaknesses, probably it's too independent also to the European market, and we need to go in other markets, more profitable and larger, the US one, and but this is for 10 years after Asia, of course. And they have the potential end of the agreement between Total and L'Oréal, as with the agreement to have common position and policies on the development of the group. And what can happen also is that one of them at a point in time decide to sell, its stake in order to get cash and to invest the cash in other operations, in other economic sector. This will be the case a few years after the deal for Total, but L'Oréal is still there. For Aventis, the strength is a strong implementation in the US, big size. Size is an important factor in that industry because you can, if you do it correctly, that means you can allocate a large amount of research on new segments, like vaccines today. Weaknesses, the PE, the market value capitalization is lower, and R&D is less efficient. That's what you find here. For the opportunities for Sanofi, it's a bigger market, the US, to accelerate the investment in the growth, to acquire a bigger size in the competition with Merck, Novartis, Pfizer, and some other. The threats, of course, that's two kinds of threats. Concentration rules, three kinds of threats, concentration rule, European measures of regulations on medicine expenses, social security budgets, to be clear. Generic expenses, generic products which are coming, and problem of patents, and regulation of patents. And this is also for Sanofi a kind of defense, even if Total and L'Oréal are there, they are smaller than the largest players, and to become bigger is a protection. For Aventis, it's to increase with synergies and better management, to use to improve its global structure and management style, and to increase its income. It's probably also to be involved, also to be confronted to new regulations in Europe on medicine expenses, budgets, and to development of generic medicine. So it seems that anyway, at least for Sanofi, it's very positive. It's not so clear for Aventis. About the position, you have small calculations also here. Worldwide ranking, at the beginning here, Aventis is number 7 in the world, number 3 in Europe, number 12 in North America. Sanofi Saint-Labo is number 15 in the world, number 8 in Europe, and number 21 in North America. And, after the merger, the new Sanofi-Aventis group will be number 3 in the world, number 1 in Europe and in France, of course, and in Germany, and number 9 in the North American market. That means the new group will really dominate the German, the French, and the European market, in spite of the competition with Novartis and Glaxo. They are now one of the players, and not a marginal player, on the US market, and they are quite big on the worldwide scene. So this is what I already explained, in terms of geography, in terms of portfolio, in terms of research. Another point which is important is the involvement of governments. You will see that during this deal, French government was really in favor of the deal. They wanted to have a French leader on the market, because of course, when you get Aventis with 50% German shareholder, 50% French shareholder, in the first analysis, because you have so large number of US shareholders here, and currently dominated by French shareholders, it is hard to understand the major result will be a shareholder, a new group dominated by the French shareholders. So just to explain now about the bid. After the first attempt to negotiate, the Sanofi management decided to launch a takeover bid on Aventis, and immediately the takeover bid was rejected by the board of directors and by the shareholders of the target of Aventis. Okay, and a kind of war started with 4 main points. That's what I'm trying to explain, and that's always what you find, or nearly always what you find. The White Knight coming in again, the White Knight was, it's a nice story. It was Novartis, and probably Novartis also, Swiss-based group based in Basel, of course, and there was discussion between the target, Aventis management and board, and Novartis, and they reached an agreement. But after that, the discussion between Novartis and the French government, and the French government didn't want this investment. They didn't want to have a big group made of the French, German Aventis and the Swiss-based Novartis dominating the European market. They tried to eliminate Novartis, and they had a few arguments, and they said, French government said, okay, the acquisitions, and merger are allowed in the European Union, and that's only submitted to specific rules, sovereignty and defense on the one side, and concentrations, cartels on the other side. But this is not the case for non-EU companies. They have to be allowed without giving explanation by the states, where the targets are located. Now remember that the headquarters of Aventis is in Strasbourg. Strasbourg is in France, not in Germany or in Switzerland. And they said, no, we don't want that, because Novartis is not an EU company, it's a Swiss company, and Switzerland is not a member of the Union. And second argument, they said, and this is very interesting for future operations, they said, in fact, their Swiss based legal basis, legal headquarter, in fact, is in Switzerland. But when we had a look to the company, we understand that the largest part of research teams today are based in the Boston area. That means, if you accept the idea that a pharmaceutical company you buy is mainly, the value is mainly in the research teams and the capacity to produce new molecules, vaccines and products, that is more American than it is even Swiss. So the French government said for two reasons we don't want this measure. When we say no to without the law, that's not permission. The second element that you can create poison pill, that's what we saw already with BSN Danone. It means generally there are options, calls in the hands of a few shareholders in order to modify the structure of the total equity at the time of the offer. So that's what they tried, the management of Aventis tried to develop, but according to the different laws, which is a bit complex, German, French, and EU regulation, it was not possible at the end. And remember, we had that system in BSN Danone and it worked. Then, of course, you have two other possible answers in the battle from the target. The first one is communication or campaign on the TV, campaign on social networks today, campaign with the member of parliaments, mayor of the cities involved, lobbies in Brussels to up to the European authorities. So that kind of thing. And they were quite good in doing that. And of course, what we call juristic defense, it means you ask to different courts in the different countries involved, you ask to judges in the courts to say what they think about the offer. And of course, that's what they started with. So very often in large and very strategic operations like this one, you have four different defensive tactics developed at the same time. Here in that case, the decision was really made by the decision, of the White Knight to cancel its potential offer, and of the French government also to say no, this is impossible. This is kind of this is in conflict. Also, this is in conflict with our strategic policy in the pharmaceutical sector. Okay, so you understand that these conflicts between the French governments and the different other players were such that another solution should be found. And the other solution, of course, could only be an improvement of the offer of Sanofi with the cancellation of the offer of Novartis. So second offer will be prepared by the banks working with Sanofi, and will be published a few months later. But in the meantime, of course, with these new repartition, with new counterpower, the French government was kind of counterpower here. There was a negotiation, and the board of and the shareholders of Aventis accepted the end an offer, still with three means of payments, but and it is always the same situation, an increase in the price and an increase in the percentage of cash. So what you find on the screen right now, it is the second offer, which is just an improvement of the first one. So if I summarize the offers, you have the first offer, hostile offer, means of payments in this offer. This is the choice of the shareholders of the targets. It could be what we call all stock option, 100% paid in shares. Okay, it can be an all cash option, 100% paid in cash, and there is what we call a standard entitlement, which is a mixed offer. I want to simplify, but payment which is partly in cash and partly in shares. And the two offers were designed the same way, just the differences are on the price itself. You have an improved price, a higher price, and we had more, better, a bit higher amount of cash, which is proposed, particularly in the standard entitlement. What's the difference? But it is also very complex in terms of legal basis, because as we have a large percentage of German shareholders and French shareholders and US-based shareholders, each time, it means from the first and the second offer, they had to prepare Sanofi, and the lawyers, the banks working with them had to prepare three different offers. One according based on the French law, second one on the German law, and the third one on the US law. That means, in fact, the first offer, the hostile offer, is made of three different offers. Same system of payments, same level of price, of course, but some of the legal bases were different. And the second one, second offer, the negotiated offer, the accepted offer by the board of representatives, was also made of three different offers, which were different in terms of legal basis. That means, if you understand what's happened, in the design of the offers, it's not two offers, it's two. The first one is, in fact, three offers, hostile offers. Second one is three friendly offers. It's much more complex than expected at the beginning of the process. So very often, when you have international players, international groups, international regulation, different national laws, you need to present on the market offers according to written according to the different laws, and this is what's happened here. So for the first one, hostile offer, you have three offers because you have three means of payments, but you have also three legal bases. 3 multiplied by 3, it's 9. Yeah, 9 offers written and presented to the market. For the second one, exactly the same thing. It is a negotiated offer, but you have 3 offers because 3 means of payments, and you have 3 legal bases, which is 9. At the end, the lawyers wrote 9 plus 9, which is 18 different offers. You understand, it's very good news for lawyers. It's very well paid. That's a great opportunity. It's quite costly for the players, and particularly, of course, for the bidder who is paying for all that. Now, another point here is a very classical one, is what about multiples, and they used multiples. They use multiples to find values for both companies, both groups, and parity of the shares of Sanofi, Saint-Elaborg, and the shares of Aventis, and it is calculated here. It's 115 after we use a multiple. Of course, behind, and didn't go into the details here, and you find it in the other set of slides, you have a question of what's happened behind. I mean, when we say multiple, what type of multiples do we use? Do we use at the same time multiples of EBIT, of EBITDA, and at the end we make some kind of average? It's like a cooking process, behind. But you know that, and that's the reason. That's what we try to obtain using parities, using multiples, parity between the two shares. The other point here, got a technical problem again, is the calculation, the problem of cash flows and calculation of cash flows and synergies, So you have a simple table there on the screen, we have to determine the synergies, cost synergies, what we call general revenue or income synergies, trying to find the value, which is probably much more difficult what we found in the food industry, because it's easier to make, we have more experience probably in the food industry than you have in the pharmaceutical sector. So anyway, we have to do that. Generally, we undervalue these synergies in that kind of difficult sector, and that will be the case. Yeah. Okay. Then we have to make assumptions about the calculation of the free cash flow and find an appropriate discount rate to make the calculation. That's very, very, very classical. Okay. So for synergies, which is what I said, you make your calculations as we did. Remember the table in the ABN AMRO case. If you want to go into the details of calculations, go back to my slides on ABN AMRO. I think they are very, very good, and you can go into the details of the calculation. Here they were done, and the synergy was estimated, it's here, 1,600. That's what you see in the second bullet point, with, as it happened very often, with more synergies, cost reduction, 1,000, and also income synergies here, 600. And this 1,600 were very simply, and this is one way to do it, it's not always very scientific finance. It's always sometimes very scientific, but it's not. It's compared to the total level of sales, and references were two recent operations made by Pfizer and by GlaxoSmithKline, and we calculated the synergies obtained by Pfizer in recent and quite comparable, it's never completely comparable operation. It was 7.3 of the level of sales, chiffre d'affaires, and for Glaxo it was about 8.4. So we went around the calculation, cost reduction, increase in revenues, in income, and after that we are not only the calculations before these, but we obtained the results after the integration, and they were 7.3, 8.4% of the total level of sales of the companies. And in that case, the calculation we did, 1,600, is only 5.5%. So, at the time it was supposed to be a valid expectation, and at the end of the process, we can show that it was clearly undervalued, that the level of synergy then was around 7.5%, which is in the bracket, in the range of Pfizer and Glaxo, so it's much higher than the 1,600 600. It's more about 2,000, 2,100 than 1,600. Okay. Now you have another table, if you are interested in that, which is much more interesting for you, which is the free cash flow generated by the operation. So we take a few years after, free cash flows calculation, classical tables, and free cash flow is what you find on the bottom line of years to come. But it's quite difficult. Okay, just a list of elements we find in the usual calculations of an income statement of a budget, and just to go through. But the difficulty is that you are making forecasts, and it's not only 1 year or 2 years, but if you want to get some calculation useful, you need 7, 8, or 10 years, and also that you have to go through each line. What would be the percentage of each line years from now? Have a look to the cost of sales, which is line number 4 here. And you see that the percentage is decreasing regularly from 10% to 5%. That means we have an improvement afterwards, in the cost of sales when we integrate the two commercial teams. But they are not marginal. It's a decrease of 50% of the percentage here. So you have really to be clear on what we do and the success on this operation. So free cash flow calculation is a hard and difficult task, even if the method is simple. It's simple. We know, of course, the method. We have been through that method several times, so I don't come back on the method. We made that in preceding courses in FA2, for example. So if you don't remember, George, go back either to the table in these 2 slides or to the FA2 course. Now, the method is always the same. We need, of course, to deal with the free cash flow in the calculations of values, net present values, which is what is needed. We need the cost of equity, and you use the capital asset price model, of course. You have the classical equation on what is the beta to use, what is the risk-free rate, okay, and what is the expected return of the market. But we know it is generally used. Okay, so calculation made. We have a cost of equity which is quite low, which is 7.8%. Yeah, and we calculate also a cost of debt, as we did in several exercises, and of course it is a cost of debt after taxes. Right? Both groups are profitable, and we get the weighted average cost of capital. When we get the average weighted of capital, you know what to do with an average cost of capital. We have to make the calculation, of the enterprise value and then our share value. Remember that the key point here is not the last part of the calculation, but it is the calculation of the terminal value, which is a kind of system of comparison as we find in the Darden-Shapiro model. And I remember about that. But after that, it's a very classical calculation. So you can get a share value, and you understand that, of course, your share value is based on several different hypotheses here, and that, of course, you need to understand the importance of each hypothesis, each parameter you integrated into the model. So that's the key point here. It's something we have been through also. It is sensitivity analysis, and you have a table here with sensitivity analysis on the discount rate and is on the WACC, and the rate of infinite growth, which is taken into account in the calculation of the model. in the convergence process and the terminal value calculations. And so we move the discount rate, we move the rate infinite growth, and try to understand what's happened in order to find a potential range of price for the offer, and of course, according to the relations obtained or the negotiation parameter included into the negotiation, you find a solution at the end, a proposal which is in the bottom part of the upper part of the range, and you understand here that the range is between 62 and 71. Okay? So that's how it works for that kind of thing. But this is, so you have at the end different values, of course. You have these values obtained by this range, obtained by the sensitivity analysis based on the free cash flow approach. You get also the multiples, or several multiples approach, and you can also go into the sum of the parts method. And that means that again, you have a sensitivity analysis, a range and sensitivity analysis on the three methods at the end. So this is what's happened here. Just a few words to talk about the conclusion. I just here they negotiated, they agreed. They agreed on the price, taking into account all these calculation and sensitivity analysis. And at the end, the largest part of the Aventis shareholder, about 60% of them, if you aggregate the three offers in cash, in stocks, and the mixed offer, choose cash. That means, of course, Sanofi management has to refinance a large part, about 60% of the total value, which has been improved. And they made an equity issue, there was dilution, and they made also, they issued new bonds. So one of the consequences was for a few years, they had dilution, they have dilution of control, they had dilution into the wealth of our shareholders, and they have also an increase in the debt equity ratio. But you know, they were protected, in fact, by their two main shareholders. So the dilution of control was not so important. It was not a real problem. And on the other side, they had enough cash flow, they produced enough cash flow after synergies, which were higher than the expected synergies. That's what I tried to explain, but they were able to pay back the interest, to pay the interest and to pay back the amount of debt in a short period of time. So the second problem was about the management. And 2 years after, it was decided, of course, that Mr. De Hecke could not be the CEO anymore. He was 74 right now. And it took about 10 years to find a solution. You know, they had 3 CEOs in a period of 10 years, and no one really succeeded in managing the new team. It was a problem of history. There was a problem of a merger. Very difficult to solve. It took 10 years to find a solution which is practical, and it seems good and solution we have right now. The other point here is that, you know, they obtained the synergy more than the synergy is expected, but it took more time than they believed, because it's complex, because, you know, they had to merge at all levels the different teams. In fact, Avantis disappeared into Sanofi. So it means the big one was swallowed by the small one, which is always quite difficult. The headquarters in Strasbourg was shut down. The headquarters now is in Paris, not in Lyon, not in Germany, not in Strasbourg. It is in Paris. I'm not so sure that this is a good choice, but for political reasons, that was the decision made. And if you have a look to the research center, there are about half in Europe and about half in the Boston area, which means the group is more and more in terms of its main strength, capacity to produce new research and new products is 50% American, 50% European today. They increased quickly their market share. They were very successful developing the market share in the US, and now we invest in many other countries, and particularly in Asian countries. So management difficulties, success in managing the financial structure, a new headquarters and structure, and a group which is less French, less German, less European than before, more American and more working worldwide. That's what is success. If you have a look to value of a group, market value as a whole, they have a reasonable increase in the market value, but they were not one of the group with the largest increase in value. Pfizer, for example, is much more successful than Sanofi, or even than Novartis today, or even like Merck. So you have leaders because in the increase in value, because we have chosen segments which are the up-to-date segments, and particularly today the vaccines. Last, the name of the group, the brand of the group today is Sanofi. That means at the time of the merger, it was Sanofi, Santé Labo on one side and Aventis on the other side. They decided immediately to eliminate Santé Labo, but to keep Sanofi Aventis. That's happened very often. You keep both names in order to integrate the teams and to show that it is a kind of merger between equal, which was not the case. It was clearly managed by the Sanofi team. And after 4 years, they decided to eliminate Aventis and on the market today, in the stock exchanges, on the different continents, they are only Sanofi. So this is, I think, a quite interesting, very good case. You have the details in other slides you received, or if you did not receive them, I will send them to Tram again. This is what I wanted to show you on the pharmaceutical industry. So we have a short break, as usual, and I move to the airlines. In order you have a dream for this presentation. It's a dream for a weekend. You cannot fly, or it's difficult to fly now, at least for you in Vietnam and for us in Europe. But anyway, we hope we'll be able to fly very soon. So let's think to these airline companies. I will show you some elements, examples in the minutes to come, just after the break. And I think you have now on the screen, you find on the screen, my slides, KFAX on airlines, and I will start with this KFAX and airlines and give some more elements on B and Air France KLM just after. So just have 5 minutes break, please. Bon, voilà ce que ça donne.
Aïe, aïe. Oh là là. Non, mais écoute, tu peux faire attention. Alors, ça, il faut que tu mettes plein écran ici, comme ça, là,
Comme ça,
ce petit carré, là, ça fait plein écran.
Là, ça marche.
Voilà. C'est ce petit carré qui est là, qui met
C'est
plein
le carré
écran.
qui est là.
OK.
Non, je sais pas si
Et
de l'autre côté,
sur la
effectivement.
taille de l'écran, tu as un zoom, là. Donc, tu peux faire petit.
Non, mais je veux tout avoir. Je veux avoir mon truc. Là, ça me convient, si tu veux.
D'accord.
Et je veux que ça puisse glisser quand je le fais glisser.
Tu fais toi.
Hein?
Tu sais les faire. Hein. Elle est
Qu'est-ce que
déjà allée se balader
T'as fait
partout.
des bêtises. T'es
Elle a
ouvert
mis
2
ses
fois déjà.
bachans. Ouais.
Tu m'as fait lever 2 fois. Hein? Je t'ai fait 2 fois de suite. Hein? Ça, c'est... Vraiment froid. Oui, je crois que ça. Okay, so I think it's time to start again with this second part of this session number 9. We had this first part, the longest one, on the pharmaceutical sector with the Sanofi case, which is, I think, a very good, interesting case, many dimensions, many questions on M&A. And now I want to move to some example in cases, airlines, completely different industry. You will understand that it's probably more risky, less important for the economy, and values are much lower than for the pharmaceutical industry. A few slides before starting with two examples. Two examples I want to go through quickly today are BA, British group, and Air France KLM, which is one member of the alliance, SkyTeam Flying Blue, with other companies. Vietnam Airlines is also one of the members of this alliance. So a few key facts here. Airlines first follow a long-term growth trend. So today you have a feeling that there is no more industry, but in fact, just have a look to the forecast published by the International Association of Airlines 2 weeks ago, and they still believe that we'll come back to a trend of growth as high as it was before the pandemic. So it seems that we have a long-term growth. The horizon, is success for this industry, but this industry is able to manage all the difficulties due to the pandemic, and after that, all the difficulties due to the climate crisis and to the necessity to reduce the pollution and the producing of carbon with new kind of engines using other energies. So second, we are in the middle of an unexpected crisis. We don't know where we are. What's in the middle? Are we close to the end? Are we in the middle? Are we in the first steps? We just don't know. Just don't know. And they had since the beginning of 2020 to manage this crisis. That means liquidity crisis. Flights decreased by sometimes 80, 85%. Problem what to do with the staff, what to do with the planes, how to maintain the expertise. When you shut down for 3 months, it's not a real problem in terms of expertise. When it's nearly closed for 2 years, you lose your expertise on managing long-haul flights, for example. All these questions are there. What also is the independence of the companies from the states. It means we have a wave of privatization. But of course, the only player able to refinance these companies are governments, states. So there is a kind of renationalization behind. Third, revenues, profits, and values in this industry are very volatile, very volatile. And crises are not only unexpected crises like pandemic. They are submitted also to political crises, to terrorism, and also to more economic crises. The price of oil is one of the key points, to explain the profits increase or profits decline of these companies. And fourth, that means in terms of risk management, risk management techniques, whatever they are, they are on the front line, really on the front line. Second, many airlines were moved from structure under the control of the states during the long period of time to privatized structure or private structure, and this was progressively done between 1990 and 2010. In many cases, also, in spite of the amounts value, which was quite limited compared to other industries, the privatization process was organized in several steps because states didn't want a government, they want to leave control, or also because of the pressures of the pilots or of politicians or of the unions, depending on the countries. Today, point 4, many companies belong to one of the three main alliances. We have three large alliances, which are, of course, SkyTeam Flying Blue with Vietnam Airlines and Air France KLM and some others, like Delta Airlines. We have World organized around the beginning British Airways and American Airlines. And we have the most powerful one, better organized, something between an alliance and a joint venture, difficult to define, we've been created at the beginning by Lufthansa and United Airlines. One of the questions is it possible to survive for an airline out of these alliances? This is one of the questions we have to deal with. 5 low-cost companies grew quickly in the last 20 years, and some of them are more profitable than the traditional companies. You have examples in Asia, but in Europe, we have two very well-known, Ryanair, which is based in Ireland, in Dublin, and EasyJet, which is a British-based companies. We have low-cost companies, and they have a better return in normal times, at least, than the traditional airlines like British Airways, Lufthansa, or Air France. If you have an analysis of these companies 2 years after the beginning of the crisis, some of them just disappeared, and some of us are very successful in terms of financial position. We recovered very quickly, but adapted very quickly. Ryanair is the best case. Point 6, traditional airlines often created or bought a low-cost company. It is exactly the same problem we find with generic in pharmaceutical sector. They need to be on this segment. Traditional companies need to be on this segment to capture customers who don't want to pay the high price. many tourists. And many short middle whole routes. And they had two potential policies. The first one was to create a new company. The second one was to buy a company. Lufthansa, with German wings, bought a company first and created the second one, and after that merged both companies. British Airways, after its alliance with Iberia, bought Vueling, which is one of the key players on the low cost in Europe. And Air France KLM decided just to create scratch a company which is called Transavia. So you have a different strategies. Buy a company, create a company scratch, or you do both, like Lufthansa, and after that you merge both companies with only one flag and one name. But anyway, all the large traditional companies now have also their low cost company. It's part, of their portfolio of activities. A few independent airlines are still profitable in their original country on specific routes, or at least they still exist. In many cases, we don't know if they are very profitable because they are completely under the control of a state, and they fly outside their own country only through using bilateral agreements. Of course, you think immediately to the case of these Gulf companies. It means Emirates, Qatar Airlines, and Etihad. And the situation is completely different. It's clear that Emirates is financed by the government behind, and they run high. They have bought a high number of planes. We are not so sure that they are profitable, and they are directly financed and refinanced when there is a problem by the local state. And they fly on routes, for example, to Europe or to Asia, we under bilateral agreement with different countries. Situation of Qatar Airlines is very, very different. They started with the same policy, but now they are a member of One World. And even if you have a look to the structure of the AIG, they have more power than British Airways. They invested quite a lot of cash in these structure and alliances. Etihad, it's really another story. They try to invest in Europe in some companies, but they had a policy which was not successful at all. They try to control Air Serbia in the former Yugoslavia, and they bought a large stake in Alitalia. And both companies, both companies were bankrupt and they shut down. So they have lost the money they invested into these companies. So Etihad is still dependent, but it's not very successful. It's not very profitable. We have stayed behind, which is like for Emirates, always available to invest, to bring more cash when needed. But, these independent airlines out of the alliances, either supported by a government, government state, or they are not very successful in terms of financial return, at least. So to the question, is it possible to survive with profits, out of an alliance? It seems more and more that it is difficult, or it is difficult outside your own country, your own market. If you have a look to Air Algérie, which is the Algerian national company, it's flying with bilateral agreements with to European countries, but the situation is they lose regularly cash outside Algeria, but they are profitable in Algeria inside the Algerian market where they have a monopoly. So monopoly is the only answer, but you need a large market. It means a large country if you want to survive. So that's on the structure. What about the values? Values are moving up and down, and anyway, airline values are very small to compare to other industries, very, very small. And the second point, airline market values are lower than their book values. This is what you understand very quickly. I will go into value calculation. I mean, you take one of the companies, traditional companies, European companies I know very well, for example, like Air France or Dansa and BRM, and say, okay, let's have a look to the market value. All of them are listed on the stock markets. And now have a look to the value of the main assets on the secondary market. What are the main assets for an airline? First, the planes. So they own the plane generally. They have large amount of debts, and some of the planes, sometimes 50-60%, are financed by leasing contracts. So you take into account all these factors, and raise a question, very simple question: how much cash you get if you sell all these planes and pay, of course, for leasing contracts and for the debt contracts, and you keep that data. Second, you move to the slots. You know that on large airports, with the traffic we have in large cities, particularly Europe, in America, but now also in Asia, it's difficult to find a slot. This is a capacity, right, to land, to stay for a few hours and to take off again. And slots have an increasing value. And large traditional companies, they have slots on the best airports, are most profitable and growing airports, more demanded. And their portfolios, if it was on the market, will bring a large amount of cash. And of course, according to the contracts, they have, depends how contracts are signed, but there's a pilot portfolio value. And if you had all these elements, and you forget some more marginal elements in the value, book value, in the value calculation, the planes, the slots, only that it's higher than market value. So that means, if you consider the traditional market value and book value ratio, it's an industry which is constantly in a situation where this ratio is less than 1, which is very surprising, for a growing industry. Don't take into account the period we live right now. So that means that point 3 valuation method includes, of course, traditional discounted cash flow method, taking into account the trend, long-term trend as a reference, multiple method as usual, but also the net asset value with the sum of the parts. I think the value of the plane, the value of the slot, the value of the pilot portfolio, and so on. Point 4, planes, slots, pilots, routes also. So what are the routes are the main assets of the company. 5, in a period of crisis, airlines need long-term financial resources, long-term loans, but also new equity. They have negative equity values for all largest parts, probably 90% of the companies. So they need new equity, new. What is the investor will invest new cash in that kind of company now, after 2 years of crisis, on the states or state agencies. So new resources, prices are brought by states, regions, which means, in fact, in opposite movement to what we knew for years, it means a kind of renationalization. Few words on Air France and KLM legal structure. These companies were created before the Second World War, partly nationalized or 100% nationalized, and they were privatized, by the last years of the last century. And they decided to merge in 2004. And the merger, which was organized at that time, created a company which is Air France KLM. Air France KLM is a holding company, including the headquarters, financial team, for example, global commercial team. They don't run any flight. They don't have any plane in the balance sheet. And this is a company which is listed on the stock market. But below, we find two operational firms called Air France and KLM. And when we go to the airport to still receive planes with the brand, the name Air France and the name KLM. We not find any plane with the name of a company which is listed on the market, Air France, KLM. So, point 4. It's clearly, a merger with a holding company and operational company. We still have two operational firms with different policies, and with the management trying to unify progressively the policy, for example, in human resource management, on investment in the planes, they're trying to do that. But they merged in 2004, we are in 2021. It's been 17 years after, and it's not a unified company. It's a group of two companies with partial merger inside the management. Anyway, they are privatized, but we still have, a large stake owned by governments or agencies or foundations close to the governments. The French and Dutch states own about 17% each, about 1/3 together. It means the majority of the shares are available to private investors and traded on the market, but a large stake is still in the hands of the governments. The member of the alliance, Sky Team Flying Blue, is Air France KLM. It's not Air France and KLM separately. That's not the operational company. This is the holding companies. And the Air France KLM received loan funds in 2020 after the beginning of 6 months after the beginning of the crisis, shut down of most of the flights. And this year, Air France, it's not on my slide here, Air France and KLM separately got equity from this Dutch and the French and new loans. So it's quite interesting in financial terms, you have a first policy of loans, short term, because we thought the crisis will be short, something like 6 or 9 months, And that was brought by the government jointly to the Air France KLM legal structure holding company. And now the states on both sides refinancing from bringing new equity and new loans the two operational companies. So we are creating a new kind of financial structure, which will be complex to remanage or to modify after the end of the crisis. About the future of these companies, cost reduction, higher productivity, investment in new energies and plants will needed. It means anyway, because of the long-term trend, climate problem, other investment will be needed and will have to be financed. And we don't know at the moment how they will be financed. That means that financial resources and research also industry. It's not for the company, but it will be partly by the company and will be needed in the motor engine producer, like Safran, General Electric, for example. And it is probably still true that low-cost companies will stay more competitive than the traditional ones. That means large groups, traditional groups, will invest more in new planes and a group of pilots and staff in these low-cost companies than of the traditional part of their group. And it is probably clear that we will see new concentration, a new concentration cycle between airlines and subcontractors of the main producer of planes. It means you have two levels here, concentration between the airlines, and that means an increased power for the alliances, the three main alliances, and also concentration at the level of the production of engines and planes. What you see right now is that Boeing and Airbus are reorganizing the structure of their subcontractors. They act as a bank, either integrating some of their subcontractors or organizing the mergers and the acquisition between several subcontractors to reduce their numbers, to facilitate their also to give them more financial stability, limiting the risk on the value chain. So this is what I wanted to show you here. Now let's have just a few slides, more slides. Hope I will see that. A few more slides. Where are they? Oh, I lost my slide again. Pum, 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 pum. Well. Okay, I'm looking for a few words on Air France first. you will find the Air France slides here. You get them already, as far as I know. So you probably my Air France Concorde flight here. And what I want to show you, it's very simple. It's 2 slides here. So I hope you see my Air France slide. You see that? I hope so. In the different deals of Air France, they use 3 methods to obtain the range and prices. Okay, and what you see here on this valuation methods, valuation methods slide is that and you have an explanation of the multiples were used. Second, they use the net asset value. That's what I explained a few minutes ago. And they use the discounted cash flow. And with these methods, they find a range and they have to find the price among the values in the range. Very classical approach. So this was the first point. The second one I want to underline here, and that was the case for many companies, but not the case for BA. So that's why I want to show you before the end of this course a few slides on BA. Generally, the privatization process were done, with a few steps. It was very difficult for social and political questions just to decide one day we make an IPO and we sell 100% of the shares. Okay. And you find here what's happened in many cases. You have several steps. First phase or step A, it's first an IPO with the first marginal issue of shares on the market offered to potential investors. But behind, you had an agreement with the pilots, generally all the staff, in some cases, generally the pilots, in order they get, a stake of a company. That was the case for Air France, it was a limited number of shares sold. This is what you see here on the left side, and a limited percentage of shares also sold to the pilots at the same time. So second, or let's say in that step, the number and percentage of shares really privatized by the government was increased because progressively the government sold shares on the market. And instead of having, a very limited percentage, progressively, the state with this process kept only a majority of the shares and rights to vote. And you see on the left side that it is about 55 or 56%. It means you start with the pilots and the other individuals, in total about 25, and at the end it is 45% of the shares and the rights of the votes who are in the hands of different investors, which are not the state or state agency. So it's still a public company because, public players, government, state, and agencies belonging to the state, they still own 55%. Okay, but you have a price on the market, you have investors. Okay, and what they decided to do, it is the merger with KLM. And merger is also a way to privatize a company. You know. In fact, the negotiation between the two companies were such that it was accepted by both governments that Air France will be for 2/3 and KLM for 1/3. And you understand that if you merge Air France and KLM, and if you have a French government and you have 55% of Air France before the deal, and now after that you get only 2/3 of 55, your percentage of rights of the shares is lower, and in any case lower than the majority. You are not a French public-owned company. So Air France and KLM were not, after the merger, owned by governments. Of course, KLM, was nearly completely privatized. Only 20% of the shares were held to the state at the time of the merger. That means that the total of Air France and KLM at the end of the process in Air France KLM was a minority stakeholder, and the company, the new company, was a private-owned company, even if it was still a large percentage, large stake in the hands of the French and in the Dutch government. And the first step is that they sold, both of them sold progressively new shares, and they declined at the end of the process before this crisis to something which was together around 16 or 17%. But they, as I showed you in the preceding slide, they reinvested in the crisis, and together, they get something like 34-35% stake of the equity of a company. So it's a private company. This has been organized in several steps. The pilot were part of the first investors. First stake of Air France was sold on the market to individual investors. After that, the state sold regularly shares on the market. This was the first step. In the meantime, KLM was privatized and nearly not for 80% of the shares. Second step was a merger between Air France KLM, 2/3, 1/3, the creation of Air France KLM. Air France KLM was the only company listed on the market after the deal. Air France and KLM operational companies were 100% subsidiaries of Air France KLM. Okay, and progressively with the merger, the control of the new company was in the hands of private interests, not of the governments. And both governments decided to sell again shares of the market, particularly the French government. And they went down to something like 16, 17%. But because of the pandemic, there was a kind of renationalization of the company, which was needed, of course, by the need for new equity, new cash. Here, I want to show you one more slide, which is here. And this slide is the organization of the firm today. You find Air France KLM, which is the central company. The power is there, management power is there, and shareholder power is there. Air France and KLM shareholders are the shareholders of Air France KLM after the deal. They own 100% of the companies, but because KLM is smaller, it's 2/3, 1/3, and the Dutch government wanted, to keep, to keep a power in strategic decision. You see what is written here. Air France KLM has 100% of the economic rights on Air France, 100% of the voting rights, but on KLM operational company, 100% of the economic rights, but only 40% of the voting rights. That means in that kind of merger, you can make a distinction between the economic and the voting right, which means that strategic decision for KLM cannot be made without the agreement of part, at least, of the Dutch investors, which are the Dutch state directly, but also foundations which are partly controlled by the Dutch and Dutch state and Dutch banks. So, you know, it's like, it's a specific rule which give kind of veto right to the Dutch government, Dutch authorities on strategic decision on Air France KLM Group, in spite of the fact they are in a situation of minor investor, minus owners in the group. This was part of the deal, and this is still there. So a merger, you know, allow a privatization of a company. Air France was privatized, in fact, through this merger, without any more negotiation with the unions or political parties or even pilots. You know. But on the other side, the Dutch, you know, strategic rights were protected by a specific process. This is what I wanted to show you here. If I can, I will show you a few more slides. Where are my slides? A few more slides. I will show you my BS slide. Okay, I don't find my slide anymore. You will receive the slide anyway. No, they are here. That's it. I find my slides. Okay, so I hope you see my BS slide. And that's very good slide. I've been working several times on this operation. Me presentation, I asked a few weeks ago to some of my students to reorganize all the slides and reports we have. And they did that, you know, you will see that slides, you know, and we have several interesting steps here. You know. British Airways is an old company. You know. British Airways has in fact created in 1974, but with two old companies, British companies, British Overseas Aircraft Corporation and British European Airways, and they were privatized in 1987. When you have a look to privatization process of airlines, you should start with this one, because it is the examples followed or adapted by all the other companies in the world. And it was privatized in one shot. It means you decide to privatize, you make an IPO, and you sign the first day 100% of the shares. This is the example. You understand that it was not the case for Air France KLM. It was not the case for Lufthansa. Lufthansa was privatized into 3 steps, you know, over more than 5 years, you know. So this is the first point here. The second one, they created One World Alliance in 1998. And One World was really also the first alliance. And in 2011, they merged, as you prefer, with Iberia. It's a bit like in Air France KLM. They created a company which was IAG, and IAG is with shareholders for 55% British, 55% shareholders of BA, 45% of Iberia. With the control is under the shareholders of British Airways, and they had two subsidiaries owned 100% British Airways and Iberia. It's very close to the system of Air France. There's no protection of the right of Iberia shareholders. It's really completely controlled by the British. Okay, and IAG is a company listed on the market today. So, what is of interest? You will see a privatization model, privatization consequences, and so on. If you read that slowly for both companies and the motives of a merger and so on, you know, it's a very complex operation. And after that, you know, IAG is there. IAG, you know, has made acquisitions, and more recently, you find other acquisitions. It means when you are bigger, larger, you have more routes, you are more profitable. That's what is explained in the preceding slide. You have also the possibility after your privatization and first merger, you have a possibility to go further into your acquisition policy and to finance this. And they have a clear plan, you know. They have a clear plan, which is first to buy low-cost company. 2013, it is Vueling. 2021, it is Air Europa, which are two low-cost companies based both in Spain anyway. And they bought a company which was number one in Ireland. It was the traditional national company, which became year after year a kind of low-cost company, Aer Lingus. It means they have only one competitor now in the British Isles, which is Ryanair, which is a tough competition. And they created also something very specific, which is very unusual. They create a long-haul airline, which is a low-cost airline called Level, which is based in Barcelona. Now, they developed, you know, IAG, they developed the One World Airlines, and One World Airlines today has 13 members, and you have some characteristic of the alliance and our main companies involved here on the left side. You know, if we have a look by market share, it is 50% American Airlines, in fact. The other companies are much smaller. The second one is Japan Airlines, the third one British Airways, Qatar Airlines behind, Iberia. After that, and all the others are smaller. So we have the dominance of American Airlines, not of IAG. IAG is just a second partner, in fact, in the alliance. It's not a very integrated alliance. You see the motives in terms of market development, operational efficiency, and retention. But if you go in each of them, you understand, you know, but this is more developed in Star Alliance. Star Alliance is much more integrated, sharing really many infrastructure, sharing also best practice. We have organized best practice transfer from all the different companies member, which is not the case into the other alliance. You know, they also have integrated, have not integrated here. This is integrated in Star Alliance the commercial team, which is not the case also for Air France, KLM. So this is one of the airlines, but this is nearly at the level of integration of SkyTeam, Flying Blue. Star Alliance is much more integrated. And kind of the question, what is it? Is it a joint venture? Is it a new company? What is it? And this is one of the problems which is raised for regulators today, how to consider alliances when they are moving on the way of integration. But this is the case for airlines, and this is the case also in another economic sector, which is also moving very quickly, which is the distribution sector. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you here on this. Okay, so I wanted to have a short presentation here because I have no timeline, showing the conditions of the development of airlines, the mergers, acquisitions, the alliance, the competition between them, the problems of values they found, the problem of calculation also of these values, book values and market values, how to consider that. I wanted to show you also how the few privatization occurred, Air France, KLM, and BA, with the reorganization, restructure of a legal basis with holding companies, Air France, KLM, and IAG, and I wanted to raise also a few questions on the management of these alliances and how they will be considered in the future by the regulators, integrated companies, in terms of market share. What do you have to consider when you are a regulator? The market share of Oneworld, Science, and Flying Blue, SkyTeam, or do you have to consider the market shares by companies? And of course, the analysis of the market and the competition will be very different, and the decision made will be very different. So, on terms of strategy and timing, this is a very, very important issue, and this is also very important in the distribution sector, where the alliances are also very, very developed. So this is what I wanted to show you this. So today what I did is really a short summary of what we did yesterday in session 9 was to introduce session 9 and to go through into pharmaceutical sector in the Sanofi Aventis case, which is very this is very, very good case. There's many questions, and you have a first set of slides, you have a simplified set of slides on the operation itself. That's what we use mainly. And after that, for your own reading and study over the weekend, you get more advanced and detailed slide. When I move to the airlines with a presentation with a set of slides on the economic sector and the question behind, and we raise particularly the questions of privatization, of values, acquisitions, mergers, and alliances, which are part, of course, of the strategic question behind there. And of course, we ask questions of the future of the sector. It seems that the long-term trend is still very positive, but we are in the middle of crisis, and we don't know when the crisis will end, and we not know how many companies will survive. And what we see at the moment is a kind of movement of renationalization, even if it is not self-nationalism, but the states are more and more the main shareholders or the main lenders of these companies. So this is what I wanted to do today. You know that you will have 1 week free And we will meet again, you know, in the week of December 20th. 3 times with your presentation, my comments, questions, and summaries, you know. It's quite difficult to do it online, but we have to do it. We have a way to move, you know, that's any solution we have right now. So on Tuesday the 21st, Wednesday the 22nd, and Thursday the 23rd, we have a free next session with the 3 cases. So I will provide your assistant Lynn and Trump with all my slides. If they don't get them, perhaps I forgot to send some of them. So don't hesitate, ask for the slides you don't find, you know, and I will try to find also a better, more easy presentations to read for at least one of the slides or one of the cases you will prepare for the week of the 20th. If you want to send me your slides before, you can. I will give you my advice. And anyway, send them to Tram and to Lynn at least 2 days before, because it's much easier for me to make comments, appropriate comments and suggestions. You have the possibility to read it before the presentation. So it's time to leave. For you, it's already 5 p.m. We are on a Saturday. You have to share the evening with your families. So take care anyway. Have a nice evening. Okay. And I see you in 10 days from now. But don't hesitate to send me emails or to either directly or through Tram and Lynn as it is needed. Thank you very much. You know, have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Professor. Goodbye.
Thank
Professor.
you.
Have a nice weekend.
And take care.
Bye-bye, Professor.
Bye-bye.
See you.